Hello. My name is June, and if you're here listening to me, you're about to walk into a world where nothing is what it seems. Where family, trust, and secrets collide, and the truth. Well, it's a hell of a thing to uncover. But hold on tight because what you're about to hear will make you question everything. And just when you think you've got it figured out, the ground beneath you will crumble. This isn't just my story. It's a fight for redemption. A fight for freedom. A fight that started in my kitchen. The kitchen was silent except for the faint hum of the refrigerator. I stood in the doorway, frozen, watching my sister, Narina, crouched in front of it, eating cold leftover food straight from the plastic container. She didn't hear me at first, her focus entirely on the food in her hands. It wasn't unusual for Narina to eat late, she had a habit of sneaking food when no one was around. But tonight, the scene felt different. There she was, hunched over like a child, devouring food as if she hadn't eaten in days. The cold light from the fridge cast long shadows across the room, emphasizing how small and fragile she looked in that moment. Her face was drawn, her clothes ill-fitting, and yet she kept eating. My heart sank as I watched her. I hadn't seen her like this before. Sure, I knew things had been difficult for her, but I had no idea it had gotten this bad. It was as if the world had faded out, and she was the only one left in it. No one had ever told me how badly she was struggling. I had assumed it was just a phase. She looked up suddenly, startled, her eyes wide as if she had been caught doing something shameful. For a moment, we just stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken words. Then, without a word, she dropped her gaze back to the bowl in her hands, her lips pressing together tightly. Her face reddened, and her hands shook, but she didn't say anything. Not a word. I stood there, caught between wanting to rush over to her and offer some kind of comfort, and the guilt that wrapped around my chest. She hadn't said a word, and neither had I. I just stood there, frozen. The silence between us felt like a heavy weight, pressing down on me, suffocating me. I wasn't sure if I should say something or just leave it alone. But I knew I couldn't pretend I hadn't seen what I had. My mind raced as I tried to make sense of what I was witnessing. This wasn't just about the food. It wasn't about the cold leftovers or the fact that she was eating them like she hadn't had a meal in days. It was about something deeper, something I couldn't quite grasp. Was this what it had come to for her? Was this the point we'd reached? How had we gotten here? I had always been the strong one in the family, the one who held everything together, even when I was falling apart inside. I had always made sure my family felt like they could rely on me. But here I was, watching my sister, and I didn't know how to fix it. I wanted to say something, anything. To offer her comfort, to tell her that it would be okay. But what good would my words do? She wouldn't believe me, would she? How could she, when everything around us was falling apart? My heart ached, and the guilt started to well up inside me. I had known things weren't right with her for a long time, but I hadn't done anything. I had assumed she would get better, that everything would go back to normal, that it was just a rough patch. I hadn't been there when she needed me. I hadn't noticed how deep her pain went. As I watched her, the tears welled up in my eyes. I knew I couldn't just walk away from this. I couldn't pretend like it was okay anymore. But I didn't know how to reach her. I didn't know how to fix this. I wanted to comfort her, to pull her into my arms and tell her everything would be okay, but it felt like there was a wall between us, a wall that I didn't know how to break down. My phone buzzed in my pocket, but I didn't move to check it. I couldn't pull my eyes away from Narina. She kept eating, her hands trembling as she scooped more food into her mouth, not even looking at the mess she was making. I could hear the faint sounds of her swallowing, but all I could focus on was the emptiness in her eyes. She hadn't said anything. Not a single word. But I could see the desperation in her movements, in the way she ate, like she was starving for something more than just food. I finally spoke, my voice quiet, unsure. Narina. She didn't look up. Her shoulders stiffened, and she pushed the bowl away, as if trying to hide what had just happened. I took a step forward, but before I could say anything more, she stood up abruptly, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. Her eyes flickered to mine, but she quickly looked away. The silence between us was suffocating. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. She didn't say anything else. I wanted to say something, anything, to make her feel better, but the words didn't come. I didn't know how to fix this. I didn't know how to help her. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the moment pressing down on me. But still, I couldn't move. I couldn't do anything but stand there, frozen in place. I finally broke the silence. Narina, you don't have to apologize. You don't have to hide from me. But she didn't respond. She just turned and walked toward the door, her back to me. I wanted to reach out, to say something comforting. But the truth was, I didn't know what to say anymore. I hadn't been forgotten. I'd been erased. The morning came too quickly, a harsh contrast to the night before. I could feel the weight of the silence between Narina and me hanging over me, pressing down like a fog that wouldn't lift. I woke up, the sunlight creeping through the curtains, but it felt distant, cold even, as if the warmth of the day couldn't reach me. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I could hear Narina moving around in the kitchen, but there was no usual banter, no lightheartedness like there used to be between us. I slowly swung my legs off the bed, my feet meeting the cold floor. The air was crisp, but the unease in my chest made it feel even colder. I took a deep breath, my hands trembling slightly as I grabbed my phone. There was a message from Carmela, the housekeeper. I heard Isolda's planning to fight this. She might try to claim Narina is mentally unfit to handle her finances. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just about the money anymore. This was about their lives being pulled apart in a way I hadn't imagined. It was too much, too fast. I walked to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing through the hallway. I hesitated outside the door, knowing what I had to do, but unsure how to approach her. As I walked in, I found Narina standing at the counter, pouring cereal into a bowl. Her movements were stiff, controlled. She didn't look at me. She didn't say anything. Just the clink of the spoon against the bowl. "Morning," I said, my voice sounding foreign in the stillness. Narina gave a quick nod but didn't meet my eyes. I watched her, trying to gauge how she was holding up. Her face was pale, drawn. There were dark circles under her eyes, and the usual sparkle in her gaze was gone, replaced with something more distant. She was trying so hard to act normal, but the mask was slipping, and I could see the cracks. I opened the fridge, trying to break the silence. "You want some coffee?" I asked, my voice gentle, hoping to get her to talk. She shook her head, but I could tell she wasn't really paying attention to me. Her focus was on the cereal, the bowl, the spoon, and not on anything else. It was like she was in a different world altogether. I stood there for a moment, the tension in the air thick. I felt the words bubbling up inside me, wanting to spill out, but I knew I had to tread carefully. The last thing I wanted to do was push her further away. But then again, how much longer could I stay silent? I glanced at her, watching as she brought the spoon to her mouth, chewing mechanically. It made something twist painfully in my chest. She looked so lost. My sister, who had once been so full of life, was now a shadow of herself. And I had let this happen. I had been so caught up in my own life, in my own struggles, that I didn't see the storm brewing in hers. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice breaking the silence that had settled like a blanket between us. Narina stopped, spoon halfway to her mouth, and looked at me for the first time. Her eyes were filled with something I couldn't quite name. Fear? Regret? A mix of both? "I'm fine," she said, but the words didn't match the look in her eyes. They never did. I wanted to press, to ask her why she wasn't fine, to demand the truth, but I didn't. It wasn't that I didn't want to know, it was because I wasn't sure if I was ready to hear it. How could I help her if she wasn't ready to let me in? I took a deep breath and sat down across from her. My eyes followed her movements, my mind racing with all the things I needed to say, all the questions I wanted to ask. I had always been the strong one, the protector, the one who kept everything together. But now, I didn't know how to fix this. "Narina," I said softly, my heart pounding in my chest. "What happened last night?" Her hands trembled as she set the spoon down, her fingers brushing against the edge of the bowl. She didn't answer at first, just sat there, staring at the cereal in front of her. The silence was unbearable. I could see the struggle inside her, the hesitation. "I don't want to talk about it," she whispered, barely audible. But I couldn't let it go. I couldn't let her drown in the silence any longer. She needed to understand that she didn't have to carry this alone, that I was here for her. Even if she didn't think she needed me, I was here. "You don't have to hide it from me," I said, my voice steady but full of the weight of everything I had been holding back. "You don't have to carry it on your own anymore." She didn't say anything, but the tears welled up in her eyes. It was as if the dam had finally broken, and she couldn't hold it back any longer. Her lip trembled, and for a moment, I thought she might cry. But she didn't. Instead, she took a shaky breath, wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and then finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, June. I didn't want you to see this. I didn't want anyone to see me like this." The words hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just about the food. It was about the shame, the guilt, the feeling that she was unworthy of help. She had been carrying this for so long, believing she had to suffer in silence. And I hadn't noticed. I had been so blind, so wrapped up in my own life that I didn't see what was happening to her. I reached out, my hand resting gently on hers. "You don't need to apologize. I'm here for you, always. You're not alone in this." Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in what felt like forever, there was a flicker of recognition in them. A glimpse of the sister I used to know, the one who laughed and joked and lit up every room she entered. For a moment, it was just the two of us, sitting in the quiet, the weight of everything hanging between us. I knew there was so much more to say, so much more to fix, but this was a start. "I don't know how to fix it, June," Narina said, her voice soft, broken. "I don't know if I can." I squeezed her hand. "You don't have to fix it right now. You just have to let me help." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, but also with hope. We weren't done yet. We had a long way to go, but this was a beginning. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could find our way out of this. The evening felt heavier than usual, the air thicker, almost suffocating. The living room, which once had been filled with laughter and conversation, now felt like a foreign space. The silence between Narina and me was like a weight neither of us knew how to lift. I had spent the entire day thinking about last night, about how things had changed so quickly. About how things had always been this way between us, yet I'd never allowed myself to see it. I stood by the window, watching the world outside move on without me, while I stood frozen in this emotional limbo. It felt as though time had slowed down. The air was cold in here, despite the warmth outside, and it felt like the only thing left in the house was that stillness. Narina hadn't said a word to me all day. She hadn't even looked at me when I passed her in the hallway earlier. It was as if she had retreated into some space I couldn't reach. The person who had once been my partner in everything, my sister, had disappeared somewhere in the shadows of her own pain. My phone buzzed in my hand, but I didn't look at it. I didn't need to. I already knew what it would say, a message from Carmela, the housekeeper, or from someone else in the family. I didn't have the energy to read more about how everything around us was falling apart. What good would it do? I set the phone down, and as I did, I heard the soft shuffle of Narina's footsteps approaching the living room. She walked into the room quietly, still avoiding my gaze. She was holding a cup of tea, her fingers curled tightly around the handle, her knuckles white from the pressure. The silence between us was suffocating. The usual easy exchange of words, the small talk that we shared to fill the gaps between us, was gone. There was nothing left but the tension, the weight of all that had been left unsaid. She didn't sit down right away. Instead, she hovered near the doorway, unsure of whether to stay or leave, as if the space between us was too vast for her to cross. She wasn't the same person I had known just a few months ago. The Narina I remembered was light, always laughing, always ready to talk, to share. Now, she was a shell of that, withdrawn, distant, and broken. "Are you okay?" I asked softly, my voice breaking through the thick silence. She nodded without looking at me. "I'm fine," she said, her voice strained. "Really?" I could see the tremor in her hand as she lifted the cup to her lips, the way her fingers were trembling slightly. She was anything but fine. I wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, to force her to look at me, to see the pain she was hiding. But I couldn't. I wasn't sure how to make her see it, how to make her hear me when the distance between us felt insurmountable. I sighed, feeling the weight of my own helplessness. "Narina," I said, my voice low but firm, "what happened last night? Why didn't you tell me?" She flinched, the question catching her off guard. She set the cup down, the quiet clink of the porcelain against the saucer echoing through the room. Her eyes darted to the side, avoiding mine. "I didn't think you'd understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I didn't want to burden you." I felt the sharp sting of her words. Burden me? I had spent my entire life taking care of everyone else, holding everything together, and now she was telling me she didn't think I could handle it? She didn't think I could help? Burden me? I repeated, my voice rising despite myself. Narina, you're my sister. You are the one I'm supposed to help. You're the one I'm supposed to protect. Don't you get that? The words spilled out before I could stop them, and I immediately regretted them. But they were the truth. I had always been the strong one, the one who was supposed to have everything figured out, to hold the family together. And now, here I was, feeling completely helpless, unable to reach the one person who needed me the most. Narina flinched, her eyes brimming with tears. She wiped them away quickly, but the hurt was already there, visible in her eyes. For a moment, we both stood there in silence, the weight of everything hanging in the air. Finally, Narina spoke, her voice breaking. I just don't feel like I belong anywhere anymore, June. Not here. Not with him. Not with you. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. I didn't know how to respond. I had always thought of us as a team, as two sides of the same coin. But now, it felt like there was a rift between us that I couldn't cross. She continued, her voice trembling. I'm so tired of pretending everything's fine. I'm exhausted from pretending I'm fine. I took a step toward her, my heart aching. This was it. This was what had been breaking her all along. The constant pretending, the façade of everything being okay, when inside, she was falling apart. I reached out, my hand brushing hers, but she pulled away, just slightly. It was enough to stop me in my tracks. Narina, I said softly, my voice cracking. You don't have to pretend anymore. You don't have to be alone in this. She looked at me then, her eyes filled with a mixture of pain and something else I couldn't place. She didn't speak for a long moment, and I thought she might pull away completely. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't know how to fix it, June. I don't know how to fix any of this. The words hung in the air, heavy and thick. I knew she didn't mean the food, or the way she had been hiding from me. She was talking about everything, about the years of silence between us, about the emotional distance, about the things we never said to each other. I squeezed her hand, gently this time, not wanting to push her away. You don't have to fix it. You just have to let me help. We'll figure this out together. Her gaze softened, but the silence between us remained. It wasn't over yet. There was still so much left unsaid, so much that needed to be fixed. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we might be able to start. Together. I sat at my desk, the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sounds of the city outside barely registering in my mind. My computer screen was open, yet my attention wandered elsewhere. The weight of last night's conversation with Narina was still heavy on my chest. The more I thought about it, the more the silence between us gnawed at me. What could I do to help her if she wasn't even willing to help herself? The phone buzzed on the desk, dragging me from my thoughts. It was a notification about a bank transaction from Narina's husband, Thatcher. My heart dropped when I saw the amount, a large withdrawal that raised a red flag. I didn't need to open the file to know something was off, but I did anyway. My eyes scanned the figures, my stomach sinking as I saw a payment sent to an unfamiliar account. The transaction wasn't the first time, but it was the most significant by far. I stared at the screen, my mind racing. Why didn't I notice this earlier? How long had this been going on? The thought of Narina, stuck in this abusive situation, trusting Thatcher and his mother to handle the finances, made my stomach turn. All those little things she had brushed off, like the odd checks and unaccounted for expenses, suddenly made sense. The guilt hit me like a wave. How could I have been so blind? I knew things weren't perfect, but I had never imagined this level of deceit. And now, it was all laid out in front of me. The betrayal, the manipulation, the years of control. All of it. I grabbed my phone and dialed Narina's number without thinking. It rang a few times before she picked up, her voice shaky on the other end. June, she said, her voice hesitant. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. We need to talk about something important. You're being taken advantage of. There was a long pause before Narina responded, her voice quiet. What do you mean? I've been looking through the bank records, and I found something I don't like, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. Thatcher's been moving money around, and it's not for the reasons he's been telling you. I heard her breathe out, a mix of disbelief and fear. What are you talking about? I paused for a moment, collecting my thoughts. I didn't want to overwhelm her, but there was no way around it. He's been siphoning money from your joint account. Large amounts, under the guise of home repairs. But the receipts don't match up. The accounts are fake, and the money's going to someone else. There was another long silence. My pulse quickened as I waited for her to say something, anything. Finally, she spoke. I had no idea. I never thought. I never even questioned it, she whispered, her voice cracking. I just trusted him. I thought everything was fine. I could feel her pain through the phone, the weight of years of neglect and manipulation in her words. I swallowed hard, trying to hold back my own emotions. It's not your fault. But we can't let this go on anymore. We need to take action. I don't know what to do, Narina said. I feel like everything is falling apart. I exhaled slowly, trying to keep calm. I know it's scary, but you're not alone in this. I'm here, and we'll figure this out. Together. But even as I said it, a small part of me wasn't sure if I believed it. How could I help her if she wasn't ready to fight back? What if she was too afraid to face the truth? I ended the call, the uncertainty lingering in the air long after I hung up. I stared at the phone, my mind reeling. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit back and let Narina continue to be manipulated by Thatcher and his mother. But how far was I willing to go to help her? How much of this mess could I handle? I leaned back in my chair, my hands gripping the armrests tightly as I tried to steady my breath. This was more than just family drama or a simple financial dispute. This was about control, manipulation, and the years of emotional neglect that had shaped Narina into the person she had become. It was about time for me to take a stand, not just for her, but for both of us. As I sat there, lost in thought, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from Carmela, the housekeeper. I opened it and read. Isolde's getting more aggressive. She's been telling people you're the one causing all the problems. You need to be careful. I've overheard her saying that if things get worse, she'll use the family's assets to make sure you're both shut down. My heart sank as I read those words. Isolde had always been a manipulative force in the family, but now it seemed she was prepared to do anything to protect her own interests. This wasn't just a financial battle. It was personal. And it was about to get a lot more dangerous. I grabbed my coat and headed out the door. I didn't know what I was walking into, but I knew I couldn't stay passive anymore. I needed to take action. I sat in the courtroom, clutching the papers that felt like the weight of the world in my hands. My knuckles were tight around the edges, my fingers trembling from the nervous energy running through me. Narina sat next to me, her posture fragile, her eyes focused on anything but the proceedings ahead. It was impossible to ignore the tension in the air. The courtroom, cold and sterile with its harsh overhead lights, only seemed to emphasize the distance between us. The hum of voices in the background did nothing to soothe the pit in my stomach. I glanced at Narina, my heart sinking as I noticed how out of place she looked in that environment. She was supposed to be standing up for herself, for us, but she was shrinking into herself instead. She was barely holding it together, her eyes avoiding mine, unwilling to face what was happening. I wanted to reach out, to hold her hand, to tell her it was going to be okay, but I didn't know how. What words could I offer that would make any of this better? How could I protect her from all the lies and manipulation that had been a part of our family for so long? The lawyer for Narina and me stood up, presenting the evidence we had gathered, the bank transactions, the forged receipts, the records of money being funneled into an account that was never ours. It was overwhelming, damning evidence, the kind of thing that should have been enough to expose everything. And yet, as I looked at Isolde's face, the calm façade she wore, I knew we were far from victory. Isolde's lawyer countered, trying to discredit the information. He spun a story about how the money had been taken to cover family expenses, as though it was all part of some legitimate arrangement. But it wasn't. We all knew it wasn't. We had lived through it, seen the manipulations unfold time and time again. But how could I make the jury see that? How could I make them understand the years of deceit, the way Isolde and Thatcher had used their position to control Narina? The tension in the room rose as Isolde herself took the stand. She put on her best act, the mask of the doting mother-in-law who only wanted the best for her son and his wife. She spoke about how difficult it was to manage the household and how she had done everything she could to help Narina, who was apparently incapable of managing her own finances. I could hardly stomach it. The lies, the manipulation. It all felt so calculated. The disgust I felt for Isolde only grew as I listened to her spin her story, twisting the truth to suit her narrative. I glanced at Narina, her face pale as she sat there, absorbing it all. She didn't speak, didn't argue, just took it. But I knew, deep down, she could hear every word. I was angry. More than I had ever been before. And I couldn't help but feel the weight of my own failure. How had I not seen it sooner? How had I let this go on for so long? The day stretched on, and by the time the judge called for a short recess, I was spent. My mind raced, my body exhausted from the emotional toll. I looked at Narina, who was still sitting quietly beside me. There was no anger in her eyes, only exhaustion. The silence between us was thick, and I felt it more acutely than ever. I tried again to offer her comfort, reaching out to touch her hand, but this time, she didn't pull away. She let me hold her hand, and for a moment, I thought we might finally be able to speak to each other without all the walls in between. But then, just as quickly, the moment passed. Narina squeezed my hand, her eyes meeting mine for the first time that day. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had thought that, by now, she would be ready to fight back. I had thought that, by now, we would be standing together, side by side, ready to take on whatever came next. But now, I wasn't sure. "You don't have to do it alone," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. You're not alone in this, Narina." She nodded slowly, but I could see the doubt in her eyes. The fear. The same fear I had seen in her eyes the night before when I discovered the truth. The same fear I had felt in myself when I realized just how deep the manipulation went. How could I ask her to face it all? How could I expect her to take on such a heavy burden when she had been carrying so much alone for so long? When the recess ended, we returned to our seats, and the tension in the room seemed to grow even thicker. The rest of the trial passed in a blur, testimonies, cross-examinations, legal arguments that went over my head. All I could think about was Narina. All I could think about was how badly I wanted to shield her from all of this, how badly I wanted to make everything right. As the trial wound down, it became clear that Isolde's defense wasn't enough to sway the jury. The evidence was too overwhelming, the truth too undeniable. The jury would deliberate, but I felt a shift in the room, a sense that, maybe, just maybe, we would win. And yet, as we walked out of the courtroom, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. The emotional toll of everything we had been through, the lies, the manipulation, the years of silence, would not simply disappear with a verdict. It was a wound that would take time to heal. But we had taken the first step. And that was enough. The morning light filtered softly through the blinds, casting a warm glow across the room, but it felt too bright, almost artificial, as though it were mocking the storm of emotions I could still feel brewing inside. It wasn't supposed to feel this heavy. Yesterday, we had fought for something. Narina had stood up for herself. She had spoken out, and in a way, it was a victory. But today, it felt like nothing had truly changed. The fight wasn't over. It was only beginning. I sat on the couch, my hands wrapped around a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. The mug had been there for a while, but I hadn't moved. My mind was racing, replaying every moment from yesterday's courtroom drama, the anger in Isolde's eyes, the cold manipulation in her lawyer's words, Narina's voice cracking as she stood up to them. I couldn't stop thinking about it. But as much as I tried to focus on the case, I couldn't shake the feeling that the emotional toll had left a mark deeper than any legal battle ever could. I pulled my phone from my pocket and checked my messages. There was still no response from Narina. She hadn't reached out since the trial. She didn't even respond to the text I sent earlier asking if she was okay. I bit my lip, fighting the urge to text her again. She needed space, I reminded myself. I couldn't force her to deal with everything I was feeling. Still, I couldn't sit still. I glanced at the clock. It was almost noon. The house was quiet, too quiet, and I knew Narina was still here. She had retreated to her room after the trial, and I couldn't blame her. I wanted to check on her, to make sure she was all right, but I didn't want to push. So, I sat, waiting, hoping she would come to me when she was ready. But it was harder than I expected. The silence between us felt thicker than ever before. I picked up my phone again and started typing a message, "We need to talk." I hesitated, my finger hovering over the send button. I couldn't just send the words and expect everything to be okay. There was so much we hadn't said to each other, so much that had been left unsaid. I deleted the text, wiped my eyes, and closed the phone. Maybe it wasn't time yet. But then, just as I was about to put the phone down, I heard the knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. I had a feeling who it was, though. I wasn't ready for this. When I opened the door, I saw him, Thatcher, Narina's husband. He looked different today. His posture was slouched, his face tired. The confident, manipulative man I had seen in the courtroom the day before was nowhere to be found. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there, eyes avoiding mine. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. I had no idea what he was doing here, but I knew it couldn't be good. We sat down in the living room, the silence between us palpable. I could feel the tension in the air, thick and suffocating. He didn't look at me, his eyes fixed on his hands resting in his lap. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I had no idea what to say. He had been the one who manipulated Narina, controlled her for so long, and now he was here, looking like he had been broken. But I couldn't pity him. Not after everything. He broke the silence first, his voice low. "I didn't think it would come to this." I raised an eyebrow, my voice steady but cold. "You didn't think what would happen?" He finally looked at me, his eyes dark and desperate. All of this. The fight, the lies. I didn't think she'd go this far." I leaned forward, unable to keep my anger in check any longer. "You're not the victim here, Thatcher. You've been controlling her for years, and now you're sitting here acting like you didn't see this coming." His face hardened. "I'm just trying to protect her," he said, his voice low and edged with a kind of defensiveness I didn't expect. "Protect her?" I repeated, incredulity lacing my words. "You've been suffocating her, manipulating her every move. You've been using her, and now you want to play the concerned husband?" He shook his head, eyes narrowing. "You don't get it. If she goes through with this, if she keeps pushing, everything will fall apart. I'm telling you this for her own good. She's not strong enough to handle the consequences." I stood up, anger rising in my chest. I had heard enough. "You don't get to control this anymore. You've taken enough from her. And from me." He stared at me, his lips pressed tightly together. For a moment, I thought he was going to say something else, maybe apologize, but nothing came. Just a long silence. The kind of silence that made me feel like I was drowning. I wasn't going to let him intimidate me anymore. I wasn't going to let him push me around, and I certainly wasn't going to let him push Narina back into submission. "I'm done with your threats," I said, my voice firm. "You don't control us anymore. If you want to keep playing games, fine. But you're not going to get away with it." His eyes flashed with something dark. "You'll regret this," he warned. I didn't back down. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I'm not afraid of your threats." The door to the living room opened quietly, and there she was, Narina. She stood in the doorway, her face a mixture of fear and determination. Her eyes moved from me to Thatcher, then back to me. She took a deep breath, and for the first time in a long time, I saw her as the person she used to be, strong, defiant, and not afraid to speak the truth. "I've had enough," she said, her voice strong, her words firm. "I'm done being silent." I could feel a wave of relief wash over me, but at the same time, my heart ached. She was ready. She was ready to fight. But it was so much more than that. This was about her taking control of her life, of reclaiming everything that had been taken from her. "I'm not going to let him control me anymore," she continued, her voice steady and clear. "You've lied to me for too long, Thatcher. You've manipulated me, and I've let you. But not anymore." I looked at her, seeing the strength in her eyes. It was a look I hadn't seen in years. "We're not going back," she said to me, turning her gaze away from Thatcher. "Not this time." I could still hear the echo of Narina's voice in my mind. "We're not going back. Not this time." Her words had stayed with me, vibrating through my chest. The air in the room felt heavier after she said it, a truth that had been hiding just beneath the surface, waiting to break free. I stood there, still processing everything that had just happened. Narina had stepped into the light, shedding the fear that had kept her in the shadows for so long. But even in that moment, with her newfound strength, I couldn't ignore the deep ache in my chest. This fight wasn't just for the money, it was for the lives we'd both been forced to live under someone else's control for far too long. The house had been eerily quiet after Thatcher left. No slamming doors, no angry footsteps, just silence. But it wasn't peaceful silence. It was the silence of two women standing at the precipice, both afraid of what came next, but both finally ready to face it. I hadn't spoken to Narina much after Thatcher left. I hadn't known what to say. The tension between us was thick, like the space between us had grown even larger after he left. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her everything would be okay, but we both knew that wasn't true. We had a long way to go before this nightmare was over. I was sitting at the kitchen table, my fingers gripping the mug of coffee in front of me, but I wasn't drinking it. I was waiting. Waiting for Narina to come to me, waiting for her to speak, for the next move to reveal itself. I couldn't keep carrying this weight alone. I needed her, and I needed her to understand that we were in this together. And then she came into the room. She didn't say anything at first. Just stood there in the doorway, the weight of everything hanging around her like a fog. She still wasn't meeting my eyes, but I could see the shift in her. There was a subtle change in her posture, a quiet strength I hadn't seen before. She walked over to the table and sat down across from me. She looked tired, but there was a different kind of tired in her eyes now. A tired that came from finally standing up for herself. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She nodded, but there was something unreadable in her eyes. She wasn't okay, I knew that, but she wasn't going to admit it, not yet. I didn't blame her. This was a lot to process. "I just feel numb," she said finally, her voice so soft it almost broke my heart. "Like, I should feel something, but I don't know what." I nodded, understanding that feeling all too well. It was a mix of relief and dread, the calm before the storm. The worst wasn't over yet. It couldn't be. I reached out and touched her hand, not wanting to break the fragile moment between us. "I'm here, Narina. You don't have to do this alone." Her eyes flickered up to meet mine, and for a moment, I saw something there, something that I hadn't seen in a long time. The fear was still there, but it wasn't as suffocating as it had been before. Maybe this was the beginning of the end. Maybe, just maybe, we were finally on the right track. The phone rang, breaking the silence between us. It startled both of us, and Narina flinched, glancing toward the sound. I reached over to grab it, hoping it wasn't someone from the family. I wasn't in the mood for more threats. It was Carmela. "I heard from a neighbor," she said, her voice tight with urgency. "Isolde's planning to make a big move to fight the case. She's telling people that Narina is mentally unfit to handle her own finances. She's going to try to use it in court, to have her declared incapable." I felt my stomach drop. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Isolde was cornered, and now she was going to fight dirty. She would do anything to hold on to the control she had over Narina, over all of us. I could practically feel her tightening her grip, willing to tear us apart to keep her power. Narina heard the last part of the conversation and immediately stiffened. I could see the fear creeping back into her eyes. "They can't do that," she said, her voice shaking. "They can't." "They can," I interrupted gently, trying to calm her down. "But we won't let them. We have the evidence, Narina. We've come this far." I could see the doubt in her eyes. She didn't believe me. Not fully. The fear was still there, lingering in the background, but I knew that was something she had to work through on her own. I couldn't do it for her. I hung up the phone and looked at Narina, trying to steady my own nerves. "We can handle this. We just need to stay focused. We have the truth on our side." Narina nodded, but she still looked unsure. She had the right to be. The fight ahead of us was going to be harder than anything we had faced so far. The doorbell rang suddenly, and I jumped. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was too late for visitors. I walked to the door, my heart pounding. When I opened it, I found Thatcher standing on the other side, his face hard and unreadable. He didn't look like the man I had seen in the courtroom, the one who had tried to manipulate the situation. Now, he was quieter, his posture slumped, but the anger was still there in his eyes. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice flat. I didn't let him in. I didn't want him in my space anymore. "What do you want?" "You don't know what you're doing," he said, his voice low. "If you keep pushing, it's going to destroy her. You're going to lose everything, and she won't be able to handle it. She'll be gone for good." "Don't try to manipulate me," I said, stepping closer to the door. "It's not your decision anymore. This isn't just about Narina. This is about what's right." Thatcher's expression hardened. He took a step forward, his voice low but threatening. "If you keep this up, you'll regret it. You're already pushing her too far. Don't make me show you what happens when people like me get pushed too far." I didn't flinch. "I'm not afraid of you anymore. And I'm not afraid of your threats. You've already done enough." I slammed the door shut before he could say anything else. My heart was racing, my mind a storm of conflicting thoughts. I wasn't afraid of him anymore. But what was the cost of this fight? What was it going to take to free Narina from the hold they had over her? But there was no going back now. I had already made my choice. The house felt eerily quiet the morning after. The sunlight that filtered through the blinds cast a soft glow across the room, but I couldn't shake the heavy feeling that seemed to cling to everything. The calm outside contrasted with the storm that raged inside me. There was a sense of peace in the air, but it was unsettling, like the calm before a much larger storm. The truth was, nothing had been resolved. Not really. There were no simple answers, no easy fixes. I sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long gone cold. The sound of the coffee machine brewing filled the quiet, but it did little to soothe me. I couldn't stop thinking about yesterday, the trial, the confrontation with Thatcher, the way Narina had finally stood up for herself. I was proud of her, truly. But there was still something gnawing at me, something I couldn't shake. The manipulation, the lies, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I had hoped, for just a moment, that with the verdict behind us, things would settle down. That Narina would feel better, that the weight of everything would lift from her shoulders. But now, sitting in the quiet of the morning, I knew it wasn't that simple. The emotional toll of everything we had been through was far from gone. It was still there, like a bruise beneath the surface, just waiting to surface again. I picked up my phone, hoping for some sort of distraction, but all it did was make me more anxious. There was a message from Carmela, the housekeeper. I opened it, already bracing myself for bad news. I heard from a neighbor that Isolde is planning to make a big move to fight the case. They might try to claim that Narina is mentally unfit to handle her own finances. My heart sank. The manipulation hadn't stopped. Isolde was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to keep her grip on everything. I read the message again, my mind racing. This wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about Narina's future, her freedom. If they were successful in discrediting her, it would destroy everything we had fought for. I set the phone down, my thoughts swirling. How much more could Narina take? And how much more could I take? We had already lost so much, but I couldn't let that be the end of it. I had to do something. We had to finish what we started. The sound of footsteps broke my thoughts, and I looked up to see Narina entering the room. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The weight of the situation hung heavily between us. She looked different, though. There was something in her eyes, something that wasn't there before. A quiet strength, even though I knew she was still struggling. "Morning," she said softly, her voice still carrying the exhaustion of everything she had been through. I smiled faintly, but it didn't reach my eyes. "How are you feeling?" She shrugged, sitting down across from me. Her hands were folded tightly in her lap, and I could see the tremor in her fingers. She was holding it together, but just barely. "I'm okay," she said, but there was no conviction in her voice. It was more of a deflection than an answer. I didn't push. She needed time. We both did. I didn't want to burden her with the details of the message I had just received, but the words kept echoing in my head. Mentally unfit. That was what Isolde was planning to claim. That was her backup plan when everything else fell apart. I couldn't let that happen. But how could I protect Narina if she wasn't ready to fight back? "I don't know what to do, June," Narina whispered, almost as if she had read my thoughts. "I feel like I'm drowning." I felt the lump in my throat tighten. She was trying so hard to stay afloat, but the weight of everything was too much. She wasn't just drowning in what had happened to her. She was drowning in the years of silence, the years of being told that she wasn't enough, that she wasn't allowed to be anything other than what others wanted her to be. "I know," I said quietly, reaching across the table and taking her hand. "But you don't have to do it alone anymore. We'll get through this together, I promise." Narina met my gaze then, her eyes filled with both fear and determination. For the first time in so long, I saw a glimmer of the woman I knew her to be. This wasn't the same Narina who had hidden behind her fears. This was the woman who was ready to take control of her own story. Just as I was about to speak again, the phone rang. I picked it up, relieved for the distraction. But when I saw who it was, my stomach dropped. It was Lazaro, the forensic auditor. "June," he said, his voice tight. "I need to talk to you. We've found something else. Isolde's financial dealings go deeper than we originally thought. There's another hidden account, and this time, it's tied to a much larger amount. We need to move quickly." I swallowed hard, my mind racing. "How much are we talking about?" A significant amount, Lazaro replied. It's going to take more than just the documents we've already gathered to stop her. We might need to bring in more legal help. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But there was no turning back now. Narina was in this with me, and I wasn't going to let Isolde win. I hung up the phone and turned to Narina. This isn't just about the money anymore. It's about protecting you. We need to stop her. For good. Narina nodded, her expression resolute. I'm ready, June. Let's finish this. The determination in her voice felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time, I wasn't carrying the weight alone. We were in this together, and we would fight, no matter what it took. The courtroom felt colder than it ever had. Despite the bright lights overhead, a chill settled over me as the judge's gavel echoed through the air. I could hear the faint murmurs of the crowd, but it was all muffled by the racing thoughts in my head. This was it, the moment we'd been waiting for. But as I sat there, the weight of everything we had been through settled heavily on my shoulders. Narina sat beside me, her fingers nervously tapping the armrest. Her face was calm, but I could see the tightness in her jaw, the way she avoided making eye contact with anyone. She was still processing everything, and I knew this trial, this moment, was weighing on her more than she was willing to admit. I glanced at her, feeling a surge of pride. She had done it. She had stood up for herself, for us. For the first time in years, she was taking control of her own life. But there was still a part of me that wondered if she was truly ready for the storm that was coming. The courtroom was filled with tension. The air crackled with anticipation, and I could feel the collective breath of everyone in the room being held. The judge had just returned after the recess, and we were about to hear the verdict. I glanced down at the papers in front of me, documents that had exposed the lies, the financial manipulation, the years of control Isolde and Thatcher had wielded over Narina. The evidence was irrefutable. It was all there, black and white, the truth laid bare for everyone to see. But even with all of that, I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling in my gut that the end was still far away. As the judge called the court to order, my mind drifted back to everything that had led us to this point, the discovery of Narina's hidden struggles, the countless lies, the subtle manipulation that had permeated her life for so long. I thought of the way Isolde had tried to paint herself as the martyr, the benevolent mother-in-law, all the while using her power to control every aspect of Narina's existence. But this was the moment of reckoning. This was where it all came to a head. Isolde's lawyer stood first, attempting to defend her actions. He argued that the money had been taken for the family's well-being, that Narina had simply failed to understand the bigger picture. I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it, but I held my tongue. It was clear that his defense wasn't going to work. The jury could see through it, as could I. Then, Narina's voice filled the room. It was strong, steady, and for the first time, I heard the woman I had known as a child, the one who used to make jokes, the one who wasn't afraid to speak her mind. This is not just about money, she said, her voice carrying across the room. It's about control. For years, I've lived in fear of them, of what they could do to me, to my life. I've let them control me for too long. But not anymore. I felt a wave of emotion crash over me. The fight, the pain, everything Narina had been through, it was all coming to a head in that moment. She wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for every moment she had been forced to be silent, for every tear she had shed in secret. She had found her voice, and it was impossible to ignore. Her words echoed in the courtroom, and I felt the tension in the air shift. The judge listened intently, his eyes focused on Narina as she spoke. I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He wasn't just hearing a story, he was hearing a truth that could no longer be denied. The rest of the trial passed in a blur, testimonies, arguments, evidence being presented, but my mind kept returning to Narina's words. She was no longer a victim. She had become a warrior, a woman who was no longer afraid to stand up for herself. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm, his decision clear. Narina was granted full control of her finances, and Isolde was ordered to repay the money she had taken over the years. There was no room for doubt. The manipulation had been exposed, and justice had been served. But even as I sat there, relief washing over me, I couldn't ignore the quiet sadness that lingered. The battle had been won, but the emotional scars would take time to heal. I exchanged a glance with Narina, and we both knew that this wasn't the end of our journey. It was just the beginning of a long road to recovery. After the verdict was delivered, we stood up, but before we could leave the courtroom, Narina's phone rang. She looked at the caller ID and sighed. It was Thatcher. He tried to apologize, tried to tell her that they could work things out, that everything could go back to normal. But Narina was done. She had spent far too long pretending that everything was fine, that she could ignore the truth. It's over, Thatcher, she said, her voice firm, unwavering. It's been over for a long time. I watched as Narina hung up the phone, a small, satisfied smile tugging at her lips. It was done. We had won. And now, for the first time in years, Narina was free. But as the finality of the moment settled in, I couldn't help but wonder, what came next? The fight had taken everything out of us, and now we had to pick up the pieces. We had won the legal battle, but the emotional one was still ahead of us. Narina had taken her first steps toward freedom, but there was still so much healing left to do. I looked at her, my heart full. We've done it, I thought. We've finally done it. This wasn't just a victory in court. This was our chance at a new beginning. We weren't just taking back what was ours. We were taking back our lives. Together. As the story comes to a close, I want to leave you with this: sometimes, the hardest battles we face aren't against others, they're against the silence we've allowed to grow inside our own families. The truth can hurt, but it also sets us free. So, what happens when you finally stop hiding and start standing up for what's right? For your voice, for your truth, for the life you deserve. Think about it. If you enjoyed this journey, make sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more stories that dig deep into the heart of family, betrayal, and empowerment. Because in the end, it's not about what's taken from us, but about what we choose to reclaim.